grand prize for some lucky person and 3 guests, a winter limousine ride to a big-time rock concert. To enter, just pick up entry forms at Domino's Pizza. There's no purchase necessary. Enter today. Coca-Cola wants you to be a winner.
King's Inn Motel, located on Route 15 in South Williamsport, where you can enjoy the finest in elegant dining in the St. Regis Room, featuring American and continental cuisine. The Emerald Lounge offers the finest in nightly entertainment and a comfortable atmosphere that is second to none. For that special occasion, the Florentine Banquet Room offers just the right touch to whatever banquet needs you may have. Our motel accommodations and VIP rooms are affordably priced with total comfort in mind. Reservations are requested. Join us, won't you, at the King's Inn Motel.
Now at 104%. Challenger, go with throttle up.
America's 56th manned space launch ends in a fiery disaster as the Space Shuttle Challenger explodes a little over a minute after its liftoff this morning. This special expanded edition of Newswatch continues. I'm Lou Waters.
And I'm Mary Alice Williams. It wasn't supposed to happen. America's space missions had become almost routine until today.
10 miles high and 8 miles from its Florida launch pad, and it seemed as if another tardy shuttle mission would finally get into orbit. For the first time carrying a school teacher, Christa McAuliffe, along with Commander Dick Scobee and crew members Judith Resnik, Ellison Onizuka, Arnold McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Mike Smith. And then instructions from Mission Control.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
And tragedy.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
The seemingly routine radio transmissions giving the shuttle's position and speed belied what had just occurred. But the huge fireball was visible from the ground, its evidence providing an eerie scrawl of skywriting over the Atlantic, in full view of the crew's families and friends.
Obviously a major malfunction. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
One of the 2 solid fuel booster rockets descended into the sea on its parachute. Fragments of the spacecraft continued to drop into the ocean for 45 minutes. Early Tuesday morning, the crew repeated the routine it had gone through Monday before the mission was scrubbed because of weather and technical problems. Well, weather came into play during this attempt as well. A 2-hour hold in the countdown was used to investigate icicles that had formed on the launch pad in the sub-freezing temperatures. But after the initial concern, the countdown resumed.
2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
And the Challenger was finally on its way. Barely a minute later, the trip ended.
Tragedy struck once before in the U.S. space program. In 1967, 3 astronauts were killed when fire swept through their Apollo spacecraft as it was being tested on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. The deaths of Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee are the only fatalities on board a spacecraft in the U.S. space program. That fire apparently started when an electrical spark ignited the oxygen-rich atmosphere in the spacecraft. The tragedy delayed the Apollo program for nearly 2 years while safety features were added. The Soviets were first in space with Sputnik in 1957 and first with a man in space with Yuri Gagarin's 1961 Earth orbit. They, too, have paid a cost in human life. A cosmonaut was killed during a 1967 spaceflight when the craft's parachute failed to open on returning to Earth. In 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts were found dead in their return spacecraft after 24 days in orbit. Despite spectacular achievements like landing men on the moon, America's space effort has been plagued with technical problems from its earliest days. The Space Shuttle program has had its share of technical troubles. The Shuttle Challenger has had earlier flights aborted because of fuel contamination, and one of its missions was cut short when an engine shut down in flight. The frequent launch postponements underline NASA's concern for safety factors, but today's tragedy emphasizes that human ingenuity cannot eliminate the element of danger from the exploration of space. Bill McGowan, CNN.
The families and friends of the shuttle crew members had gathered to watch the launch in the viewing area at Cape Canaveral. Among the well-wishers, the sister of Christa McAuliffe, who proudly watched the teacher astronaut launched into space. Everything had looked as if it were going smoothly, then the explosion. The anguish and horror in the faces of those in the viewing stand were mirrored throughout the world. NASA specialists rushed to the viewing stand to tell the families of the people in the sky what had happened. Flags at all public buildings be flown at half-staff through February 3rd in honor of the 7 crew members who died in today's explosion. For 7 days, all flags will be flown at half-staff.
Today's shuttle tragedy also has sent shockwaves reverberating through the nation's capital. NASA's acting administrator William Graham was briefing members of Congress on his agency's budget at launch time. He and the legislators he was talking with were watching the liftoff on television. For details on that reaction from Washington, we're going to switch now to the White House, where CNN's Frank SESNO will join us. Frank.
Well, Lou, official Washington watched right along with the parents of the shuttle crew and the rest of the nation as pride quickly turned to horror. The president watched in what was described as stunned silence, a video replay of the shuttle explosion. He postponed his State of the Union address, appearing instead in the Oval Office. He called it a day of mourning.
Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss.
Said the president, we mourn 7 heroes. He praised the astronauts' families and the astronauts themselves, who, he said, had a hunger to explore the universe.
We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers.
The president dispatched Vice President Bush to Cape Canaveral to deliver a personal message of support to the shuttle's crew's families. Acting NASA Director Bill Graham was ordered back too and will head an investigation. For so many in Washington, the loss of the shuttle and its crew was like a loss in the family. A teacher in space was the president's idea. Christa McAuliffe had been to the White House. Senator Jake Garn had flown the shuttle last year and had developed special bonds.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends. Mike Smith, the pilot, was my mother hen.
Yet Garn's confidence in NASA appears unshaken. He says he'd fly again. Congressman Bill Nelson flew the last shuttle and says despite Tuesday's horror, space exploration will proceed as long as humans thirst for knowledge.
We will continue to press outward. And in the process, there is risk. That risk is taken by each one of us every day. And that risk is understood by all the members of a crew that climb into a loaded spaceship.
The sense of loss, tragedy, and disbelief was no less keenly felt by those who'd never flown into space, and the House of Representatives held a mournful moment of silence. President Reagan says the U.S. will continue its quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights, the president said, and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers and more teachers. Said the president, nothing ends here. Lou?
Frank. Frank SESNO at the White House. Newswatch will continue in a moment.
June Ellison for Depend Undergarments.
Listen to this letter. I'm leading an active life again. Depend is a godsend. Isn't that wonderful? Letters like this prove that for men and women with bladder control problems, there is help. Depend undergarments with absorbent layers for extra protection. It's form-fitting, nothing shows. So you feel dry, comfortable, and confident. It's so simple. Get back into life. Get back into life with Depend.
Do you know what all these people have in common? They're all members of the National Rifle Association. Why have 3 million Americans join the NRA? For just $15, you receive full membership, which includes $300 gun theft insurance, $10,000 accidental death and dismemberment insurance, $100,000 shooter's liability insurance, and your choice of NRA's official magazines, The American Hunter or The American Rifleman. NRA is easily the shooter's biggest bargain, so why not join now? To join the NRA, simply dial the toll-free number on your screen.
Join the NRA today and get an NRA shooter's cap free. To join, call toll-free 1-800-453-6200. 1-800-453-6200. We'll bill you later.
Continuing coverage of the worst disaster in NASA's history continues here on CNN. The first in-flight disaster in 56 U.S. manned space missions occurred this morning, 72 seconds after the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was 19 years ago yesterday that 3 astronauts were killed in a 1967 launch pad explosion during the Apollo program. That was Apollo 1. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee were killed in that accident. There has been nothing comparable to that accident in the space program until today's disaster. At first, it sounded like triumph again.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Now control program. Roger, roll, Challenger. Good, roll program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange. Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%. Challenger, go at throttle up.
And then it happened. An explosion. The Space Shuttle Challenger disintegrated. The contrails of the rocket boosters spinning off the destruction of the 25th shuttle mission. The shuttle program now is on hold. Here's Mary Alice in New York.
And joining us now in Washington is Representative Manuel Lujan of New Mexico. Congressman Lujan is the ranking Republican member of the House Subcommittee on Space Science and Applications. He was with the acting NASA administrator when the shuttle exploded. Congressman, even those people who are very accustomed to watching routine launches took a while to have this sink into him. Did the NASA administrator know instantly what had happened?
We knew immediately what had happened, Mary Alice. When that happened, we had been watching the television screen, and he immediately ran to the phone and called his office and said, do you have a direct line to the Cape? And apparently they said yes. And then he just said, I've got to go, and he ran right out of the office. He was very visibly shaken. He knew what had happened.
And you, shortly thereafter, met with White House advisors. What was that about?
Well, it was both when Dr. Graham, the administrator of NASA, and when Dr. McTeague came into my office also, these had been prearranged to have some briefings on the various programs, but obviously we weren't able to talk about them because everybody was shaken, and you just couldn't concentrate on the matters.
Will your subcommittee stop working on these programs at all and on figuring out funding for them until after it's determined what happened up there?
No, the budget for NASA, well, for the whole government, as a matter of fact, will come to us February the 4th from the President. We already have a general idea as to what will be in there. But no, we will proceed with the funding portion of it. The only thing that will probably cease, Mary Alice, is that the shots themselves, the launches themselves, because nothing will happen until we find out exactly what it is that happened today.
But your instinct regarding the subcommittee and, in fact, all of Congress will be that these programs will continue to be funded?
Oh, I think so. You know, the investigation will go on. NASA, as a matter of fact, has begun to put a committee together to find out what happened. And once we find that out, why, we will continue. I don't think that the space program is in danger of being cut out.
Okay, thanks for being with us, Representative Manuel Lujan of New Mexico.
Thank you.
And now we go to Lou Waters in Atlanta.
Today's space shuttle disaster has cast a cloud of uncertainty over the future of the U.S. space program. CNN's Stacy Jolna examines the possible impact of this tragedy on manned space flight.
The keepers of the space program say this latest tragedy won't stop America's exploration of space.
Are we going to be perfect forever? I guess the answer was proven this morning that the answer to that is no. But that doesn't mean that man doesn't keep trying in these areas and that we're not just as dedicated to seeing that this kind of research goes on.
I think that we can look forward to monthly and then bi-weekly and then even more frequent launches. We just must push ahead if it is important to have man in space, and it seems to me and to most people that it is.
I can't judge what decisions NASA will make, but my own opinion, again, after the investigations, we should proceed with the program, and that would include the civilians in space program as well.
The program will not proceed in the short run. The shuttle's busiest schedule ever will be delayed while investigators figure out what went wrong. Columbia was scheduled for 4 missions, a study of Halley's Comet, a launch of 3 communications satellites on a mission that was to have included Indonesian and British crew members, a secret military mission next fall, and a launch of 2 communications satellites on a mission that was to have also carried a materials science lab.
6, 5, we have made...
The shuttle Challenger was to have launched the unmanned Ulysses probe to the sun via Jupiter. Another mission would have launched a 3rd shuttle tracking satellite. And a 3rd trip would have been the first to take a journalist into space, launch a communications satellite for India, and retrieve an experiment package dropped in orbit in 1984. A 4th trip was planned as a secret military mission. Shuttle Atlantis was set to send the Galileo probe to Jupiter, as well as launch a $1.1 billion Hubble Space Telescope. And Atlantis was scheduled to perform the first of 12 planned scientific Earth observation missions. Shuttle Discovery was to be the first flight from Vandenberg Air Force Base, carrying Air Force Undersecretary Edward Aldridge into space. NASA hoped to pay for much of the shuttle program with commercial payloads, and the short-term delay could be costly.
And on the commercial side, where we get our dollar and cents return from these investments, you've got to have men up there, the brain behind the eyeball, to fix these automated factories that we hope to put into space and make sure the product keeps flowing.
The U.S. space program has lost rockets and dollars before, but it is the loss of 7 lives that has put a new cloud over the nation's space race. Still, in and out of the White House today, many are saying the sacrifice made by those who died is a compelling new reason for America to forge ahead in space.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them.
Stacy Jolna, CNN, Atlanta.
In the meantime, Old Glory flies at half-staff as the nation mourns. Newswatch will continue in a moment.
Shortcuts from General Foods, a series of creative ideas for people with active lifestyles. People like Jeff Baker, systems analyst, whose shortcut is a quick and easy dinner.
You know, when I work late, I want something I can enjoy, that's good for me, and easy to make. So I've come up with a meal that's quick, nutritious, and tastes great. And I can make it in 15 minutes. I'll show you how right after this.
I met a man who can take you 1,000,000 miles away, all in one evening.
So how do you like my office? Wow. Looks like we still got some setting up to do. Come on, Hal. Let's go get some hot coffee.
There's one instant decaffeinated really worth sharing. Maxwell House Instant Decaffeinated Coffee. The only one with enough rich, fresh taste to be called Maxwell House.
Well, curtains up.
It couldn't be anything but Maxwell House.
Okay, now I make my shortcut with half a chicken cutlet, frozen mixed vegetables, ready-made Italian salad dressing, and rice. Now, I brown the chicken in 2 tablespoons of the Italian dressing. Then, I add a little less than a cup of the loose frozen vegetable. Add 1/3 cup water, bring it to a boil. Now, stir in 1/3 cup of the pre-cooked rice, cover, remove it from the heat, and let it stand for 5 minutes. And there it is. Now, for added flavor, I like to add just a sprinkling of grated Parmesan cheese. It's perfect for nights you have to work, or even nights you don't.
This has been another shortcut for good eating for active people from General Foods.
Millions of Soviets watched the shuttle explosion on TV just hours after it happened. 4 Soviet cosmonauts are known to have perished in space missions since manned spaceflight began in 1961. But Soviet liftoffs are not usually shown on TV unless a non-Soviet astronaut is on board. And landings are never broadcast until it's known for sure the crew is safely back on Earth. For the most part, the Soviet space program is not conducted in public, and details of accidents are not available to the public.
CNN's John Zarrella has been with us all day since the launch and afterward from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where the recovery efforts now are going on. John's on the line now. John, what's the latest on this recovery mission?
Well, as darkness is now falling over the Kennedy Space Center, the aircraft search, the search by aircraft is being suspended, and that will resume, of course, in the morning. The ships will continue to search all night long. The latest word we have from the Department of Defense folks here at the Cape is that the search area is some 50 by 100 nautical miles. And if you took a pencil and ran a line straight out southeast from the Cape, about 50 miles out, that would be where the search area would begin, and then stretch it to the north, another 100 miles. So it's in that general area. The exact distance that offshore of where the impact was is still not quite known. The Department of Defense says they believe whatever they may find, main chunks of the spacecraft would be in a depth of water from 70 to 200 feet down. Of course, if it's that latter, 200 feet down, it's going to make it much more difficult to recover pieces of the spacecraft. Whatever pieces of the space vehicle are recovered are going to be brought here to the Kennedy Space Center and placed in a hangar where, of course, they will be examined and prodded and probed. Any pieces of debris found by people that happens to float up on shore or found by boats out there, fishing boats, are going to be brought to Port Canaveral, a pier at Port Canaveral, and from there NASA will pick up those pieces. But again, NASA believes the impact point is somewhere about starting at about 50 miles to the southeast of the Kennedy Space Center and then stretching up north about 100 miles. It's quite a wide area of search, but that's where they're focusing their attention now.
John, you may have already answered my next question, but I'm wondering, because I'm a television animal, why we have seen no television pictures today of this impact area or the search going on. Do you know why there has been no television coverage, or is there going to be any?
That's a question we've all been asking, and I can tell you that they have changed gears so many times here. At first, the Navy was in charge, and then someone else was in charge of the recovery effort, and now the U.S. Coast Guard out of Miami is actually in charge of the recovery effort. And I would imagine, knowing how the U.S. Coast Guard is, that they probably have their own camera people and their own photographers shooting videotape of the recovery effort. Whether we'll see that, we don't know. Of course, an entire blackout has just about been imposed on any information, any details that may come in. And I just think that at this point, they want no one in that area, and they want no pictures out from that area. And of course, they couldn't get in there for at least an hour after the actual explosion, because debris was still falling from a height of at least 50,000 feet. So there was general concern for safety of the ships that were out there just standing by to recover SRBs and to keep other ships out of the area on just a normal launch day. But at this point, no, I really can't say why we have not been provided with any NASA pictures of the air, except maybe that it's just such a huge, enormous area, and they say they have not actually recovered any pieces, that they have just seen pieces from the air and that the ships are on their way to pick them up. And that's where it stands right now here at the Kennedy Space Center, Lou.
All right, John Zarrella, now to MA in New York.
Across the nation today, Americans stopped what they were doing. As news of the shuttle disaster spread, they rushed to radios and television sets trying to grasp the unfolding tragedy. CNN Sandy Kenyon takes a look at how the media covers a breaking story like this.
Space shuttle. After 24 successful missions, shuttle flights had become so routine, none of the 3 major broadcast networks bothered to interrupt their regular programming for live coverage of this most recent launch. Only CNN and some local stations were actually carrying the picture from Cape Canaveral at 11:38 in the morning Eastern Time. But within minutes, anchormen at CBS, NBC, and ABC were at their desks, and once again, Americans were watching a national tragedy unfold on television. From the neighborhood bar, all the way to the White House.
We immediately adjourned our Oval Office meeting and went into an adjoining room, the President's study, where there's a television, and the President then began to review television reports of the explosion there shortly after the launch.
The era when most Americans suffer a tragedy together by means of television began with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. It's often referred to as the moment when TV news came of age, because for the first time we were able to witness for ourselves live the killing of Kennedy's suspected assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, the return of his body to Washington, and later his funeral. In 1968, another Kennedy brother was killed. And when Robert Kennedy went down in a Los Angeles hotel corridor, TV cameras arrived on the scene almost immediately afterwards. With improved technology came the ability to cover a story live from overseas. Satellites brought us news of the capture of Americans by Iranians, and even spawned a new program which grew into a show called Nightline. Pictures of the unthinkable, an attack on the Pope, were seen in the United States shortly after it occurred. Television's capabilities have sparked a debate. When does the medium cease to become an observer and instead become a participant? Case in point, the hijacking of a TWA flight in the Middle East, when terrorists used television to state their case directly to the American public. But despite the criticisms of TV news by some, it's certain to continue to act as the national clearinghouse for information about a tragedy, as well as a forum for later debate over that tragedy's causes and consequences.
This showbiz today will not be seen in its usual time slot tonight, so that we may bring you this special edition of Newswatch, which continues in just a moment.
Hey, Melissa.
Showbiz Today, normally seen at this time, will not be seen tonight, only so that we may continue bringing you coverage of today's disaster with the Space Shuttle Challenger. NASA is refusing to speculate on what went so disastrously wrong with the shuttle launch this morning. The Challenger exploded into a mass of flames a little over a minute after blast-off from the Kennedy Space Center. 7 crew members were aboard, including the first teacher in space, Christa McAuliffe. Roughly 5 hours after the explosion, NASA grimly announced that there were no signs that any of the 7 on board had survived. All searchers found as they combed the waters off the Florida coast were pieces of charred debris from the Challenger.
And people in the special VIP viewing stand, including the families of the shuttle astronauts aboard, watched in anguish and horror at the shuttle's explosion. In Concord, New Hampshire, at Christa McAuliffe's school, the children were watching too. Howard Nielsen has this report.
The shock of Christa McAuliffe's death has settled on her hometown, Concord, New Hampshire. Students filled the Concord High School auditorium to watch the launch. As Challenger lifted off, they shouted, clapped, blew horns. At first, few realized what had happened. Then, the fact that what began as a joyous event had turned to tragedy hit them.
They said on TV that it blew up, and everybody started crying. That's when I realized what happened.
It was hard to believe at first because there'd been so many others that were not so good, and this one not blew up.
The students were told to return to their classrooms. Reporters and photographers were asked to leave. Back in the classroom, the students watched reports of the disaster. School officials met to determine their course of action. They decided to send the students home.
I think NASA are going to be looking a lot more closely, a lot more seriously at the dangers, and I think people are going to be more aware. And no doubt, I think it's going to put a tremendous effect on NASA and what they're going to be doing.
Ever since it was announced Christa McAuliffe would be the first civilian in space, people here shared her joy and excitement. Now they share her family's grief. Howard Nielsen, CNN, Concord, New Hampshire.
The families at Cape Canaveral were joined in their grief by Vice President Bush, sent to Florida by the president, who wanted him to express the sympathy of the nation to the crew members' families.
The families of the seven, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us.
President Reagan has ordered flags on all public buildings to fly at half-staff for the next week.